And I'm beginning to look at what's going on in Austin that maybe ought to be more appropriately done at the local level. And as soon as you say that, your city councilman and your county commissioner is going to say the last thing we need is more mandates from Austin. You know, one-size-fits-all government doesn't work very well when it comes from Washington, D.C. Is that the right direction? Keep going, though. And it doesn't work very well when it comes from Austin out to Texas either. This is a big state. We've got to be courageous enough to let Harris County be a little bit different from Montgomery County, be a little bit different from El Paso and Nueces and Hidalgo and Beaumont, and say keep it local. So as we look at things that would better be done at the local level than mandated out of Austin, we ought to also look at, is that the proper relationship? Because it seems to me it ought to be 6 and 2 and not 2 and 6. We don't get back there overnight either. But when we're talking about things that the state of Texas ought to be doing, don't think that we're the same, Kay Perry and Rick Hutchison and I. See, they're going to be, some of you got that. They're going to be big spenders. When they talk about doing these things, they're going to talk about taking more of your money. I'm talking about putting your money back down here on the local level, shifting that balance so that you've got the resources that you need and giving you a truly limited state government. Which might bring up the question of transportation. Anybody here concerned about transportation in Texas? We've been talking a lot about the TTC, and I've been asking a lot of questions about what's going on in transportation. I think most of us are uncomfortable with a lot that's going on in our government. We have this sense that we're not being given the whole story. In my little rural county, we had three TxDOT hearings with our money, purportedly so they could understand. They're either really slow, really dense. I don't know why they needed 3, because Lord knows every one of those hearings, those public hearings, were full of Texans saying, bad idea. We don't want to give our state to a foreign company. Not too hard for most of us to get, but they got really thick skulls at TxDOT and they just couldn't get it. And it's died 5 times, so we've been told. But just last week, there was an employee of TxDOT testifying in the Texas House that it's still alive and well and those contracts are still in place. Just a few months ago, the senator released her transportation plan, and she has in there a multimodal network, transportation network. Call it multimodal transportation network, call it TTC. The plan is the same thing. Kay Perry and Rick Hutchison are going to shove the NAFTA super quarter down the throat of Texans unless we change our course. When we talk about funding transportation, she will pat herself on the back that we're getting 92 cents of our dollar, of our fuel tax dollar, coming back to Texas. Texas is a donor state. We get 92 cents back, and the governor will say, but only 72 cents is spent on roads because the feds mandate that we use the other 22 cents for transit, high-speed rail, and bus services. And I said to the Dallas Morning News editorial review board that I didn't believe that ought to be Washington's decision, and I thought most Texans wouldn't want those 22 cents spent on transit. We ought to spend them on roads. And the Dallas folks said, well, what about buses? And I said, no room for buses in Texas state tax dollars. You want a bus in Kingwood, then you get a bus in Kingwood. Better yet, let some private entrepreneur run a bus service in Kingwood. Not good use of tax dollars. But if we really had some courage, we'd recognize that those fuel tax dollars go from the distributor to the comptroller to Washington. I'd say we call Comptroller Susan Combs and ask her to send a memo to Washington and tell them that check's not coming next month. You know, I don't know that that's good advice for you and the IRS, because I think individually, you know, they come after you. But it's a different deal when the state of Texas says, we're not sending you those funds, those are our transportation dollars. I was pleased in that last debate to hear the senator say she had introduced a piece of legislation that would allow Texas to opt out of the federal highway program. Do we need their permission? See, I think the Constitution says they only get Article 1, Section 8, and everything else is left to us. So how about we just tell them? If we're serious about being a pro-life state, how about we just tell them abortion won't be legal in Texas? You know, we've had conservatives that purport to be pro-life waiting for somebody else to overturn Roe v. Wade. What are we waiting on? Why don't we do that here in Texas? Put the bill through the legislature, debate it. If you want a constitutional amendment, then put it on the ballot. But those powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the people and the states. And the number one job of government has got to be to protect life, liberty, and property. Life starts at conception. Government's job is to protect that life. Government's job is to protect that life regardless of the sad, unfortunate, or misfortunate circumstances of its conception. We can be very empathetic to a woman who finds herself in an unwanted pregnancy, whether that pregnancy was unplanned or the result of rape or incest. That is an innocent life in that womb, and it must be protected. I hope what you get out of Debra Medina in the Medina administration is ideologic logic, consistency. If it's a life, it's a life. I'm not going to make exceptions for rape, incest, or the life of the mother. So I'm politically incorrect pro-life, because there's not a politician out there that will tell you that. I'm going to tell you that. It's a life at conception. As a registered nurse, I've spent 25 years primarily, because I don't do babies, I had two, but that's it. Primarily, my nursing career has been at the other end of life. I've dealt with a lot of death and dying, all ages of death and dying. We got a real problem in this state with Terry Schiavo-like cases. We're not dealing with that. We've got to be dealing with that. If we're a pro-life state, then we've got to protect life, innocent life, from the beginning of life until natural death. Secure freedom, because where there's freedom, there's prosperity. Get rid of property tax in Texas. Recognize that no amount of police or military presence can keep you safe from a deranged individual. Start telling your citizens to buy guns, learn to use them, keep them with you. You'll be safer for that. Start standing against the federal government. I think we've got to draw, it's going to take us years to weed it out, but we've got to draw a line in the sand and say not one more illegal federal action, Washington, D.C., not one more federal action that's outside of the U.S. Constitution. We will meet you at the federal courthouse every time you step outside of Article 1, Section 8. We've got to work hard and smart with the Texas congressional delegation, but when they are ineffective at stopping the passage of illegal federal action, Texas has to say, we got your back. Y'all get up there to Washington and you represent our state, but when they get by you, they're not coming through Texas. We're going to keep them off the backs of Texas families. We're going to keep them off the backs of Texas businesses. Texas will regulate her industry. She will regulate her businesses. When we're courageous enough as Republicans to put into our Republican Party rules a term limit, not to punish people, but because we recognize that politics is a corrupting sphere and we limit our exposure to corruption, we get a set of House of Representatives and senators who are interested in passing fair and just laws, not interested in creating rules that help or hinder businesses and their competitors, but laws that are fair and just. We'll get freedom and prosperity back in this state in ways we haven't thought about in years. Claver said the harvest will be so great, the nets will break, we won't be able to contain all of the prosperity that we have. Some of you have heard the term, a rising tide floats all boats. When there's prosperity here, everybody will be better off. We begin to get the government off of our back, tell Washington not one more step, and begin to push the EPA out and push the Department of Commerce out. We'll trade with who we want to trade with. We'll buy and sell what we want to buy and sell and trade. Get Washington out of Texas. We'll have great prosperity. Fourth pillar, I guess, of this platform, if you will, is addressing illegal immigration and border security. Recognize that the wealth of a nation is her people. I talked about that a little bit with Russia and how when you take and take and take, even though the resources are there, the nation will crumble